video in the series of how to construct a clay head using an armature. Now in this last video we're going to talk about removing that cardboard and newspaper armature from inside of the head, and there's two ways you can go about doing that. In both ways, in both methods, you have to remove that cardboard base. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. And I'm just going to carefully kind of like pry it away from the bottom of the head. And when I'm handling the head, I'm being careful not to kind of mar it and damage it. But it's still fixable. It's still at that leather hard stage. So that'll pull off pretty easily because the paper tape has all gotten moist from the clay. So I'll put that aside. Now I'm looking up into the base here, and I see the newspaper in the center that I tucked back up into the cardboard cylinder, which is the neck support, and I can kind of just unfold that and give that a little bit of a twist. And if you've got delicate things in your hair, let's say, parts of the head, be really careful handling this. You don't want to break your sculpture. So I'm going to slowly pull that out, and that's going to tear, kind of the stem's going to tear off, and it's going to leave the ball of newspaper kind of up in the main portion of the head, and then you're going to see your cardboard cylinder. And I'll slowly start to pry that away with my fingertips, and I work my way around, and once I've kind of pulled it away from the walls, it should pull out relatively easily, which it does, and put that aside. Now we're just left with all that newspaper kind of way up in there. Now there's two methods of taking that newspaper out. If you feel that your head hasn't gotten excessively thick in the process of kind of the addition of clay to your sculpture, then you could try to just pull everything out through that neck hole using, let's say, a pair of scissors, because you can kind of get up up in there, grab hold, twist it, pull, start tearing pieces apart. Sometimes it comes out in 2 or 3 shots. Sometimes it takes a little bit more work, but eventually you'll break that newspaper smaller and smaller and smaller, break it up into smaller pieces, and then it'll just pull right out. I've had great luck with this in the past. But if you really feel like you've got some thick areas, and I know that I do, because in building this head, I added quite a bit of additional thickness to the clay wall at the back of the head. That's the only place I'm really concerned about. The bottom here I could kind of thin out from the bottom just using my trim tools, so I'm not concerned about that. But I am concerned about this area and through here. So I'm going to show you the way of basically kind of taking the top of the head off carefully and coring it out on the inside. So I usually choose right above the brow because there's not a lot of detail, and I use a fettling knife because it makes a nice straight line. And I roll that around, and it's going to go above the ears. And I'm trying to make as little effects to the detailed areas. So it's making kind of just a nice straight line. There we go. And this line here, kind of just push that back together. You're not trying to cut through it right away. So now I have a line. So now I'm going to start, and I'm going to continue along that line slowly with a fettling knife, working my way around. Hair is usually a place where it's easy to fix the texture afterwards. It's the smooth areas that take a little bit more work to disguise that seam, because we're going to have to put that top back on, and we don't want to make it harder than it has to be. Okay, now once I feel like I'm getting close to, I'm going to start kind of trying to really push my way through. Be careful with this knife. Fettling knives are sharp. You wouldn't want to stab yourself. This is like an insurance policy. Once you've taken the top of the head off, you can really kind of see what's happening on the inside in terms of the wall thickness, and you can kind of make it as consistent as you would like, so that you know there's never going to be any issues with it blowing up. Okay, we're almost there. We'll see that top of the head just all of a sudden kind of loosen up. There it is. There we go. All right, so now pops right off, and we can see right into the inside of the head. We'll pull that. This will come out super easy. Pull all that newspaper out, and now we can really see to the inside, right? And see how kind of bumpy and irregular it is in there, and how thick the wall is back here versus right in here by the temple. So now I'm going to make a 1/4 inch line with my needle tool. And then I'm going to use that as a guide. And I'm going to start taking, I'm going to do the same thing here to the top of the head. Same kind of 1/4 inch wall thickness. There we go. And put that aside. Now I can start with my big trim tools, my loop tools here, and I can start kind of like just carving out that thickness, and really be careful that you don't over carve and cut through a wall. And you want your clay to be really nice and leather hard, so the head isn't moving, it's not changing its shape. And once you get your clay down to close to the final thickness, I want to show you a tool that works so nicely. It's a butter knife, because you can get really deep in there, and it has some serrations to it that allow you to scrape the surface. It compresses as well as scrapes, and really kind of makes that surface nice and uniform on the inside. I think the butter knife is a really, and this is you can use a small loop tool to get into areas that, like where your nose facial features are. And always probe with your fingertips to make sure that your walls you're not getting too thin, because you might be kind of behind an eye socket, and that might be kind of getting recessed, and you don't want to carve any clay from that area at all. Like this area here is quite thin at the front, right in here. So I wouldn't know that unless I kind of probed with my fingertips. Right, so I'm going to kind of keep on working my way around. Looks like there's some thickness down, usually right about in the jawline. There's definitely some excess thickness happening. Go. So after you feel like you've really kind of worked your way around the head thoroughly, all parts, and you've done the top of the head as well, and you've cored that out with your trim tools, and maybe work the butter knife to compress and make the surface smooth, then Keep both these pieces, don't let them get any drier, so keep things sprayed as you're doing this, because if this takes you a while and this is sitting out air drying, things can get too dry to reattach. So keep things wrapped, keep plastic handy, keep a spray bottle handy. Then you're going to put those two pieces back together. Now score really thoroughly. I mean, when you go around the entire point of contact, make sure your score marks are deep, close together, and the same thing all along this edge. Then use a generous amount of construction slip, right? Kind of really lay it on thick. Then push this together using a lot of pressure. Make sure it's aligned right. Push it back together. I'll work all the way around the whole seam. Then those seams that'll still be noticeable, you may need to take a very small clay coil and kind of like work some clay over that a little bit. As it starts to dry, continue to kind of compress it. Don't make it perfect right away, because if you kind of try to clean it up, make it perfect when the clay is really wet, it's going to shrink more, right? This is leather hard, so it's going to shrink, and that seam will become noticeable again during the process of drying. So just leave it a little heavy. As it starts to dry, start to compress it like with a wood tool, and then you'll kind of get it to the point where by the time it's leather hard, it'll be nice and clean, and that seam will completely disappear. In areas where you've got kind of texture, let's say in hair, those are areas where that line sometimes can be easily disguised with the texture marks or linear marks that you've already had created in the hair. And once you've kind of got it back together, your head, in terms of the green stage, is completely done. So good luck, be careful, don't try to damage it, but if you do happen to break anything, remember it's still leather hard, so you can still go back and make some kind of repairs.